everyone. Welcome back, our TN Tales listeners, to Season 2, Episode 5, Part 2.
Thank you so much for everybody who has participated in the Blurb giveaway. And thank you so much to Jessie, who has offered to do this giveaway. Just because she's doing someone else's blurb doesn't mean that no one can learn from it. So I think this will be beneficial for all of us. The lucky winner whose blurb is going to be reviewed by Jessie is Olivia Eiley. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, it's Sarah's fault. So we will hand it over to you, Jessie.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to share my screen for the people who are following along on YouTube, but I am also going to explain this in full if you're just listening along. I edited a blurb live on masterclass I did yonks ago now, and I genuinely thought it would be mostly useful just for the person whose blurb it was, but the feedback was that everybody loved it and everybody found it really useful. So I hope that that's the case today as well. And it's where I got my idea for my blurb audit service as well, which is essentially where you spend an hour with me doing this. Like, we have your document and we're just making live changes together and getting the blurb rewritten in real time if there's any sort of problems in them and stuff. So I do normally have the author here to ask random questions, but I know Olivia has given us a fair bit of information, so hopefully I've got everything I need to give this a good solid review. What I might do is read out the full blurb for our listeners so that we all sort of hear how it sounds. It's a sapphic romance, and our hook is, what could be worse than finding out your one-night stand is your new colleague? When Harper Stewart and I hit it off at an international advertising conference, a one-night stand with her seems like a safe bet. She's not from around here. So when Harper Stewart shows up at work after we spend a great night together, that's got to be the worst thing that can happen, right? She might be the first woman I've pined over in years, but that doesn't change the fact that I have to focus on work. Then Harper's put on the pitch I need to nail for my promotion. I can't get distracted. All I want is a fresh start. A big move to London, a great new job, and hooking up with Chloe Newen. What a week. And Chloe's not only my new colleague, but then I'm put on a major pitch with her. It's the opportunity of a lifetime to learn from the best. This international move is starting strong. Unfortunately, she can't stand me. I can't go home with my tail between my legs. I have to make this work. So this is the full blurb. I think there's so many great things about it. Most of what I'm going to talk about is changes, but there are actually lots of good things here as well. So first up, I love that we've actually kind of got a double hook. So the what could be worse than finding out your one night stand is your new colleague is the first hook. And then the second one is that all I want is a fresh start. For those looking at the video, they're both bolded. So we actually get like a visual break between the two. And this is a dual POV blurb. It's quite a nice way to do a dual POV blurb because sometimes you see them broken up just by having the name of each character at the top of each section. And to be honest, it's great so that we know their name. And I've written lots of blurbs like that as well. But it can feel stilted. So I do like this double hook situation happening here. The first thing that I thought when I looked at it was that we've got a bit of a word count problem. So if I highlight this, our word count is 189, which is on the lengthier side. So I like to aim for 150 words with my blurbs. And if we get like an upper limit of 180, that's okay. Often I'm sitting 140 something, which to you right now might feel really, really, really short and like, oh my goodness, what can I possibly delete from my blurb? I already have deleted everything, I think. So looking at this visually, I'm like, okay, it's a little on the chunkier side. That's fine. I don't want this one to be any more than 160 words. That's kind of the ballpark I have in my head. 160 words is going to be the upper limit. Now, straight away, this second half is looking pretty good to me. This looks more or less the right kind of length. Now, I did check this before, but I need you to know that I was as happy as you are about to be when I found out that it's exactly 80 words. So when I say we need the first half to match that, 160 words, 80 plus 80, right? So we're roughly aiming for that. The first half, I think, and this is very common in blurbs, we're trying to get the story out. And the same thing happens when you're writing long form. We're trying to get the story out. So we write a bunch of stuff that doesn't really need to be in there while we're trying to find what does need to be in there. So it's very common for blurbs to be a bit top heavy. There's not a huge amount that I want to change about the second half of this. I got a couple notes here, but I would like to sort of chat about what I would work on in this first half. So dual POV, you want to be really careful not to double up on information. So if I'm looking through this, I'm seeing that actually we know that Harper's put on Chloe's pitch at work, And then later on, Harper tells us this in her POV, saying, oh, if that's not enough, I'm put on a major pitch with her. So instantly we know that we don't need that information in both paragraphs. It's more important in Harper's part because clearly she's quite sort of inspired by Chloe as well. And it's kind of like, oh, this is an opportunity to learn from the best. Great. So she's sort of in a bit of a mentor position in a sense there, from what I can see. In Chloe's POV, actually, the bigger deal for her is that Harper's walked in and is now like there at all. It's not actually that Harper's put on the team. Like that's not the worst thing necessarily. It's just that Harper is there at all. So that means that we probably don't need that information in Chloe's POV. So I do really like the first sentence. You know, we find that we've introduced Harper when Harper Stewart and I hit it off at an international advertising conference. One night stand with her seems like a safe bet. She's not from around here. That's all great info. And we also start to get an insight into how Chloe's thinking. Like Chloe clearly doesn't want anything serious. She doesn't want to see this person again afterwards. So we're actually picking up all of those cues already without having to say it explicitly, right? And I think Olivia put somewhere else in the sort of plot notes and stuff she gave me that, again, like, yeah, Chloe's not looking for anything serious, and that's part of the conflict. Something that popped out at me straight away, and this is partly because I was reading it out loud, is that we have Harper Stewart twice. So those of you listening probably heard it real quick because if you're reading it, you don't necessarily notice it, but we've got Harper Stewart in the first line, Harper Stewart in the second line. We don't need her full name again. In fact, the way that I would recommend actually changing this, I put a little comment over on the side so I wouldn't forget my suggestion, but my screen is a bit laggy, sorry. So rather than saying, so when Harper Stewart shows up at work after spending a great night together, I would like to put something, so why is she in my office the next morning? Worst coincidence ever. That's actually where I would go with that. So that actually cuts a bunch of words. So I'm going to actually, now that we've seen the original, I'm going to copy and paste it into here so that we can actually maybe start to see what this looks like. Oh, good. I love it when Google chooses its own formatting. That's fine. So why is she in my office the next morning? Worst coincidence ever. The other thing that we're sort of getting from here is a little bit more conversational because we've got this first person, you know, she might be the first woman I've pined over, but I want a little more personality. I want a little more conversation there. So potentially Olivia's looking at this now going, Chloe would never say worst coincidence ever. That might not be the right way for her to express herself, but I would like to see a little bit more conversation in there. And we don't need to double up on saying, you know, she shows up at work after we spend a great night together because we already know the intention was to have a one night stand. Seems like a safe bet. So we assume that it's happened. And the last part of that sentence was doubling up on the hook because it's saying that's got to be the worst thing that can happen, right? We've already kind of got that question in the hook up the top. What could be worse than finding out your one night stand is a new colleague? So just subtle little double ups here because it's all important information. We just don't need to say it more than once. But often we feel like we have to because this is the important information that's banging around our heads. So we've now cut a bunch of words from the first paragraph. The second paragraph, again, feels a little bit slow for me. She might be the first woman I've pined over in years. Actually feels like we've skipped a step here because all we know is that it was a one night stand. And then, oh no, now they're in the same office. But pining over someone suggests a prolonged contact and also a level of investment that actually feels a little too fast perhaps here. So then the actual overall effect is that the momentum of the blurb slows down because we're suddenly like, where are we? We lose our flow. So I would focus on the way that Chloe is feeling when Harper first shows up. Is it like anger? Is it fear? Is it, this is just so inconvenient? And that will actually get a bit more of the character in there. So it could even be like maybe she's got like really great memories of the night before. I was super steamy. Maybe it's like, you know, I might still be thinking about XYZ, but that doesn't change the fact that I have to focus on work because she might be the first woman I've pined over in years, just feels a tiny bit general and a little less personal to me. I want more of the character's voice in there. So I would potentially, and this would be something that the author would be best placed to sort of like jump in and pick, but I would be going for something like, I can't help but remember blah from the night before, for example, or maybe it's just her eyes are sparklier than I remember from last night, something like that, you know, like, so we're getting a bit more of the chemistry in there, but we get back to this very no nonsense. That doesn't change the fact to have to focus on work, and we don't need the bit about the pitch now. So Harper's put on the pitch I need to nail. So then we just go straight from, doesn't change the fact that I have to focus on work. I can't get distracted. So this probably cuts, let me see if I can, look at the word count with, I will accept these changes and then the moment of truth will arise. I don't know if I've hit 80 words yet. 83. That's pretty close. I'm actually pretty happy about that. I might continue playing around with it and seeing if I can shave a few words off. I wouldn't necessarily get too freaked out about the fact about being 3 words over, but have a few more ideas that will actually bring that word count down just a fraction, quite a bit. Are there any questions from my lovely hosts or anything you wanted to point out?
I love how something so small can make such a big difference. Because, like, just that one sentence or just that one wording that you switch can open up a whole different way of how you look at a pitch or how you look at a blurb. And so just from sitting here, I was like, oh my gosh, what can I change in my blurb?
I'm so glad. That's what I want to inspire. So I wonder if I can like shorten this sentence, like the very first sentence a bit. International Advertising Conference. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. Like maybe I would still play around with that a little bit, but for the most part, this is now looking visually much better to me. And like I say, I don't want to change a whole heap about the second half. I just don't love the bit about I can't go home with my tail between my legs. I have to make this work. Again, I could be misreading this slightly, but I want something a little spicier, maybe like a bit more chemistry focused, because this makes Harper sound like it's a project rather than something she's enjoying. But the first part of Harper's section sounds like really happy. It's like, oh my gosh, it's not only my new colleague, but then I get to do this. Like, and then all of a sudden, this is kind of like I can't go home with my tail between my legs. Indicates a bit like it's a matter of just pride, maybe, rather than she's actually really attracted to this woman and actually is like really interested. So my suggestion, which will shave off some words, was I have to look at my little comment to remind me. So unfortunately, she can't stand me, which only makes me want to change her mind. ... That's the direction I would go. Sorry for the screen jumping around here, but that's the direction I would go. It shaves off a few words and also feels more warm and like I really care about this person, because again, we know that Chloe's not interested in anything long term, but then Harper's, thinks she's really great. So that's something that I would put in. So that's what I would do there. And that then saves us, probably the 3 words that I actually put in the in the first half, which would just kind of makes it that little bit easier. The only other thing that kind of bugs me just a little is that I do feel the first hook is a little on the long side. There's no precise science to this. I have written hooks this long, but I think it's because we lose one night stand in the middle of the sentence, and then our eyes kind of just rest on new colleague, which is not necessarily the most exciting part. And also, the what could be worse than finding out your one night stand is your new colleague makes me want an answer.
When you asked for comments, I was like, that it feels really long. Both of the hooks I have questions about. And I wondered if something like, why is my one night stand my new colleague? Yeah. Just make it snappy and that shock factor that she's going to get later. Yeah. And the other one, all I want is a fresh start. Like that feels a little like too on the nose of saying exactly their perspective. Is there a way to like play with that a little?
Potentially it could be like, I really need this fresh start. Has a little more urgency to it, because looking through the character motivations that Olivia sent through, it does feel like this is quite important. Does that sort of feel better to you? Yeah.
Yes, that feels a lot better to me. Yeah.
Yeah. We maybe don't even need the really, I guess. Really need this fresh start. I like really personally, but you could sort of potentially have a play. Yeah, in terms of this question, I like your suggestion. I've been thinking about this for days now, and I'm still trying to settle on the right sort of iteration. The why does work, just with my change here. So why is she in my office the next morning? Probably feels a bit too doubled up. I'm actually wondering whether it needs to be a question. Like it could be something along the lines of, no one wants their one night stand like on their, proposal team, or what do you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing, rather than it being a question. That's still a little bit too wordy. Or it could be something along the lines of what happens when your one night stand is sitting at the desk next to you the next morning. You know what I mean? Like that kind of direction.
Or maybe it could be, like you said, like more of a statement to be like, a one night stand shouldn't be my new colleague, or something like that.
Yeah. My problem is I've written so many one night stand hooks. They're all fighting in my head. It's harder and harder to come up with something completely different. So I was even wondering, do we need one night stand in there? We have one night stand in the first sentence of the blurb. So should it potentially be something along like, you could even do something really short, like one night, one big mistake, for example. So that would be like shorter again. It's a bit more rom-com-y. So like it'd look like one night, because that's also the way that Chloe sees it. you know, is like, oh, okay, yeah. And this also then gets people intrigued, like, well, okay, what was the mistake? And then we find, like, it gives us a bit more of a tease, because then we don't find out, like, oh, she's in the office until the end of paragraph 1. We just know there's a big mistake, and we start to sort of see the things add up. It's like a one night stand seems like a safe bet. She's not from around here, but you go, oh, okay, I see where this is going. And so why is she in my office the next morning? Worst coincidence ever. This one, again, would be a little bit up to the author in terms of how they want to market this and the tone that they want as well. And this is why, like, on the blurb audit calls, there's lots of back and forth. I'm kind of like, does this word feel right? Does this word feel right? And it's super fun because you have, with that input, things move really, really, really fast, because they can go, no, that sounds terrible. I want it to be focused more on this. So I'll leave that idea kind of there. I mean, we've sort of talked through a few different directions it could go, but that then would make it quite a bit shorter again. In fact, I'm curious enough that I want to accept these changes and see how we went with word count, because what's the use if I haven't made it shorter and better? Oh, 146. I'm really proud of myself right now. That's actually shorter than I thought it was.
Oh my gosh.
Because sometimes it's hard to eyeball. Yeah, we need like the little applause button.
Where's that sound effect? Even looking at it just visually on the screen right now, like, it looks so much cleaner. Like, if I picked up a book and I looked at the back cover, I'm not going to feel lost in the words before I even start reading them, because they are 100%. So it just feels so much more straightforward, I want to say.
Yeah. And this is something that was done so well in like the second half of the blurb, is like, this is the really clean bit to look at. You're like, oh yeah, I want to read this bit. There was too much chunk up the top, which is when we want to ease readers in, right? We want them to not feel like it's a huge job to read that blurb. At the bottom, she's written the romance pitch, which is the title, is Chloe and Harper's story, because this is from an interconnected, series. I didn't include that in my word count because I didn't include it in my initial one either. I tend not to include those things as like the blurb word count, but you would do well to really still try to keep 180 words as an upper limit, including endnote if you can, because it's still, that's the amount of text that readers are going to have to contend with. So it was 197 words with the endnote previously, and now it's 154 including that endnote. I mean, that's still only 8 words in the endnote. It's not a long one, but even so, 154 it's a nice amount of text. And then you've got to also remember that when people are looking at it on their phones, it starts to look like this. So you get, and I've just pulled the indent in so that we can sort of see what the paragraphs look like on a more phone-sized screen. Those paragraphs, even single lines, start to look chunkier, right? So that's something to kind of bear in mind as well. So once we start to go over the 150 word mark by too much, it's actually a lot for the eye. And blurbs are a very visual thing. They're something that you want to be able to look at. I mean, it's like an advertisement. No one wants to do an ugly advertisement that people don't want to look at, don't want to engage with. It's a similar thing. We want to look at it and we want to see nice formatting, make sure you figure out how to do your bolds and your italics and your line breaks on Amazon and things as well, because we just want to look at it and it be an effortless reading experience. There is one more tiny bit that's kind of bothering me, but it's not a major thing, but because I won't sleep properly unless I talk about it, I'm going to quickly go through. This line in Harper's section, so where it says, and Chloe's not only my new colleague, but then I put on a major pitch with her. I don't love starting with the and then having the but in there as well. Like, it feels like too jerky. So I don't mind, and Chloe's not only my new colleague. The major pitch is not necessarily the most interesting thing about this bit. The most interesting thing is that they're put on the same team. They have to work together. And what I'm curious about, and this could be a shot in the dark, but I'm curious as to whether or not Chloe is actually kind of in a bit of a mentor position for Harper. Now, I could be wrong, so I'm going to leave this one up to Olivia to decide on. But potentially, we could focus on that sort of relationship. Chloe's not only my new colleague, she's my mentor. It's the opportunity of a lifetime to learn from the best. That then flows that little bit more, because it isn't quite clear with the opportunity of a lifetime bit whether she's talking about the company, whether she's talking about Chloe specifically. So if specifically she's in awe of Chloe and it's like, oh wow, I can learn so much from her, then I think maybe rather than focusing on the major pitch, focus on maybe them being put on the same team or Chloe being a mentor. That would just feel a little smoother, and I would get rid of the but in the middle of the sentence. Buts are kind of funny in blurbs. They're sort of mini plot twists, and if you've got the and then the but, it can just feel a little jerky. So it's a really tiny thing, and I'm being super nitpicky because that's what I get paid to do. But that's something that I would just consider reshuffling a tiny bit. But from a word count perspective, we're now home and host, which is really exciting.
We've been saying back of the book a lot, but for people who are thinking, but I'm putting this into an agent, the agent a lot of times is looking at these queries while they're in breaks, while they're doing other things, because they have clients to take care of. And they're going to take 30 seconds. And if you haven't caught them in 30 seconds, they're swiping. They're moving on because 100%. they want to know whether they want to care about the book. One element a lot of people don't realize is how succinct and clear your blurb is written tells people a lot about what they're going to get into in that book. And if it's very wordy and lots of filler, they're going to feel like, oh, wow, it's going to be a long read. It's going to be a dragging read because there's a lot of words here.
100%. It's that, it really is like apart from the cover, it's the first impression. I always say it's the first impression your story makes on people, because the cover is like, it's the aesthetic, it might tell them the genre, it might give them a bit of an indicator about main characters, but the first time they enter your storytelling is actually the blurb before they open the book. If, like Nell, they don't read the blurbs, they just dive into the book, maybe that's not the first part. But in terms of, Amazon, SEO, all that kind of stuff, this is the first time we get to encounter your storytelling. And absolutely, if you're putting this on queries, agents don't have time to wade through big chunky paragraphs. Brutally put, if your blurb doesn't flow and it has repetitive information, they're going to probably assume your manuscript might suffer from the same. And I get that, the editors will still go through it and all the rest of it, but it can show a particular eye for detail that makes a really great first impression.
Very true.
Exactly.
I think my work here is done, but like on the whole, like huge chunks of this blurb have remained unchanged. I will say that, like, whether you're watching along the video or listening, like, it's actually the small changes that often make a really big difference. As we said before, sometimes when people get on a blurb audit with me, they feel really intimidated because it's like, oh, I'm paying someone to be like, that's wrong and let's change this. I hope that at least from this, people can kind of see it's a much more collaborative process, and it's actually about, a lot of the time, about fine tuning and being like, okay, what can we scrap to make room for the better stuff? Like, sometimes that's what we do. Like, sometimes people come to me with a great 150 word blurb, but there's superfluous information there that we can get rid of. And I read their synopsis and go, wow, why isn't this in here? Like, this is great. Why don't we have this in the blurb? So sometimes it's throwing stuff out to make room for other stuff. And other times it's just throwing stuff out. And occasionally it's putting stuff in. And actually, a lot of what you have on the page may make it through the audit. It's not like we're going to burn everything to the ground. But those small changes are also really satisfying. I think that's part of the reason I love it, is that they're like small tweaks, but huge benefits. And yeah, you can just look at it afterwards and go, wow, this is instantly easier to read.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jessie. I think I have learned a lot, and I'm going to go to my blurb right now and go cry first and maybe work on it. So I know you are kind of stuck and busy until May, but if someone is looking to work with you, where can they go find you?
Bookblurbmagic.com is probably the place to start. You can download my free blurb cheat sheet there, which is a great place to start. That'll put you on my email list, which I email 5 times a week with blurb tips and information. You can unsubscribe at any time, but there's a lot of info in there that, I get people emailing me all the time being like, your freebie and your emails have improved my blurb so much. So, if you're in a tight budget, that's the way to go. When you go download my freebie, it also gives you a little discount on my course if you decide to jump into it. So that makes it super affordable. My custom blurbs are booked out until, I actually think it's June now, which is kind of insane. But I do have blurb audit spaces. So I do 12 of those a month. I think March just booked out, or there's like 1 or 2 spots left. So if you I don't know when this episode will come out, but April onwards, there's still spots. And that basically means that you get to jump on to an hour call with me, and we get to do pretty much exactly what I did in this episode, but with your direct input. And we have a lot of fun. That's the main way to get into my queue more quickly than June. But I also have, a bunch of DIY courses and masterclasses that you can explore as well. That'll cover all kinds of aspects of blurb writing if you prefer to do it yourself, which I commend and really enjoy helping people with.
And I know that some people enjoy social media a lot, and I know that you've been taking some time off of social media, but can people still go and find you on Instagram, or what other
platforms
are you using?
Instagram is good. Just my handle's at BookBlurbMagic. And I also have been hanging out on Threads a bit more as well. I made a lot of reels last year, got a little bit burnt out, was like, I need a break. And then I made a reel the other week and was like, I'm back. Definitely come DM me, come and hang out, comment. We'll have a good time.
I am excited to hear all of the fantastic feedback from people on everything that you're teaching them. I know there are quite a few of our listeners who actually have been asking for this episode since last season.
So flattering.
So I'm really excited for them to hear it. And thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your day. We appreciate it so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more and learn more and just support us, please go follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Teen Tales Podcast, and on TikTok or Twitter/X at Podcast Tea Tales.
Thank you so much. This was super fun.
Let's get your fingers back on the keyboards and your pens back on the paper. Happy writing.
Bye!